Hey everyone, we're going to talk about adaptation to exercise, homeostasis, and exercise prescription. What leads to adaptation to exercise? So first off, we'll talk about the relationship between exercise and health. This will be kind of a 10,000 foot view of the relationship. And then we'll talk about how changing or getting out of a homeostasis can be a good thing or a bad thing. And we'll talk about the exercise recommendations. So, the relationship between exercise and health has been known intuitively for a long time. Exercise has been prescribed as medicine for thousands of years. But we started to get some pretty solid evidence about it in like the 1950s. And it started with what we refer to as the London bus study. So in this study, Morris and colleagues wanted to know if exercise or sedentary behavior affected your health in the long term. And when you're thinking about things that affect health or lifespan, there's always so many confounding variables. If you're comparing me to someone else, there's differences in socioeconomic status, how much money I earn, how much, if I'm insured, where I live, if I live in a polluted area, what I eat, all those things. And so it's really hard to match someone who's physically active to someone who's inactive because there might be these confounding variables, other explanations. Well, Morris came up with a really cool idea to test that. On those famous double-decker buses in London, there were two jobs and two guys in there usually, and they earned about the same amount of money. They were all about the same age. One of them was the bus driver who sat down and drove through London all day, and the other was the guy called the conductor, who got up every once in a while to take tickets, went up and down the steps a bit, and they spent the same day, same stuff together all day, right? They traveled the city, same polluted city, everything. So it was as tightly controlled or matched as you could really get. It's a pretty cool design of a study. Well, he went in and looked at who died more, the conductors or the drivers. Now, if we look at the total incidence here, well, I guess up here is where we want to look. The total incidence of heart disease, uh, the drivers in the 1950s, those who drove the buses had a greater rate of cardiovascular disease than those who got up and moved around a little bit. Then they continued this in another set of studies where they compared postmen, mail carriers who would walk around neighborhoods and deliver letters, right? So they're pretty active throughout the day versus telephone operators back in the day when the operator had to like plug cords in to connect you with someone else, a sedentary job. And you saw the same thing again amongst these government workers that the telephonists who were sedentary had a much higher rate of death or higher incidence of cardiovascular disease than their fellow government workers, the postmen. So this is some of the first concrete, solid evidence to indicate that exercise has a potent effect on your risk of death. And now I would actually interpret this differently. This is often used to say that exercise reduces your risk of death. When we're talking about like these conductors on the buses, they're not really exercising. They're just getting up and moving a little bit. I think what this, especially the bus study shows, is that inactivity, sedentary behavior increases your risk of death. So either way, what you do if you're sitting or moving, that influences your risk of death and your health overall. And since that time, there have been thousands of studies to verify this. This is what's called a meta-analysis, a summary of all high quality studies. And in this, they look at risk of death, mortality risk versus how much exercise you do per week and something called med hours per week. You'll learn about that as you get further into the exercise science program. For our purposes today, this is low physical activity or low amounts of exercise or none, and this is very high amounts. The amount, like the recommendations, I think I misspelled that, sorry. The recommendations for physical activity, like 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, that comes in right about at that middle point. So this meta-analysis indicates that If you go from being sedentary, absolutely no exercise, to getting half of the daily recommended value, your risk of death over the next 10 years drops by about 20%. And then if you keep increasing that amount, you see risk of death go down a lot. And it seems to, for the most part, seems to plateau down here. There might be a little trickle upwards at these really high levels of exercise where the risk might be going up. But still, let's say that you're this person, you're training for like a double Ironman or something. That's what we're looking at for the amount of exercise here. Your risk of death has gone up a little bit, but it's still well below the couch potato, right? So solid evidence uh, that indicates that exercise reduces your risk of death. And so we're going to work on exercise prescription for health. And a lot of that exercise prescription has to do with something called homeostasis, or a balance between supply and demand. Now, we have this thing called the FITT principle that we use in exercise science and exercise physiology to prescribe exercise. The general principle is that you've got to overload the system to elicit adaptation. If you're doing something that you're used to, the body already has everything it needs to do that. So there's no reason to adapt. So with the FITT principle, we find ways to increase the load on us, to overload our system to elicit adaptations. So we can increase the frequency of how often we do an exercise. Instead of running 1 day a week, we run 2 days a week. We can do higher intensity. If you, instead of walking, you run. You can increase the time. Instead of running for 10 minutes, you run for 30 minutes, right? All of these changes can elicit adaptation, or you can change the type of exercise. If you've been running for your whole life, maybe try something new. If you try swimming, try weightlifting, these things will elicit different adaptations. Now, over on this side of the diagram, I illustrate a balance between supply and demand. So when we exercise, we demand the body to do something that it's perhaps not used to. If it's hard, if it's harder than we're used to, we're asking the body to do more than it has a supply for. If I ask my body to run at a VO2 of 4 liters per minute, and I only have a VO2 max of 3.5 liters per minute, I'm demanding my body to do more than it has the supply. That's called overload. And the amazing thing is that your body responds to that. If you're doing something just beyond your normal capabilities, the body adapts and will increase how many mitochondria, how many red blood cells, it will increase the size of your heart. All these things will change to help you adapt to perform that exercise. But you have to tip the balance. If you only ever do things that you're used to or that your body already has the supply and capability for, you get no reason to get better. One of my favorite studies about adaptation is called the Dallas Bed Rest Study. And in 1966, they got a bunch of 20-year-olds and measured their VO2 max, had them get on an exercise bike and measured how much oxygen they could consume in a minute, like the most, right? And then they put them on bed rest. For 20 days, they couldn't get out of a bed, not even to go to the bathroom. So they were stuck in bed for 20 days. And in that scenario, now their body has more supply than they're demanding of it, right? So before this, they'd been held regular physical activity, hadn't changed it a lot. So supply and demand was matched at baseline. But then they go in and put them on bed rest, and now all of a sudden they have a bigger heart than they need. They have a heart big enough to pump a lot of blood, but since they're inactive, their body's only demanding a little bit of blood. And so now the supply is outweighing the demand. And to deal with that, the body reduces the supply. You'll see a reduction in blood volume, or you'll see a reduction in muscle mass. All these things, if your body's not using it, you're losing it in an attempt to reestablish homeostasis. And it should be no surprise that the VO2 max of these people went down after 20 days of bed rest. Now, this is called a principle of reversibility. If you don't use it, you lose it. Just because you're strong in high school doesn't mean you're going to be strong all the rest of your life. You have to keep training. If you don't keep training, it goes away. It's the second law of thermodynamics. It comes to get us all the time. You'll learn a lot about that in physics. Now, after they were in bed rest, they exercise trained them for 8 weeks, increasing the demand on them, made them get up and go running 3 times a week for 8 weeks. And now they're demanding their body to do more than their little hearts were used to from bed rest, right? So now the heart and the lungs and the muscle, all that is being demanded to do something just beyond its reach, and the body adapts. So they see an increase in blood volume, see an increase in heart size, increase in number of mitochondria, and the VO2 max goes up. So you can train. Where here they overloaded it again, and you can train the system to get better. What I love about this is that it tells us that even if you've been inactive for a little bit, sedentary, you can still see adaptation. Now, what I love about the study is that they brought them back 30 years later because they were all friends who were subjects in the study. So they all got back together 30 years later and measured their VO2 max. After 30 years of aging, here's their VO2 max. Here's where they were before when they were 25 years old. Notice that 20 days of inactivity was worse for them than 30 years of aging. If you tip that balance to where you're not demanding your body to do much, it adapts. Inactivity is very harmful for you. Now, aging reduces VO2 max. We'll talk about that in class. But they wanted to see, can people adapt to exercise still if they're older? These are like 55, 60-year-olds. And so they exercise trained them, and they were able to increase VO2 max. By exercise training, they put more demand on the system, and the body adapts. So they saw an increase in VO2 max. Now, the caveat here is that they exercise trained for 6 months, and they didn't see nearly as much of an increase in VO2 max as they did in the past. We still can adapt to exercise training when we're older. Everyone adapts, but sometimes the adaptation is blunted. And that holds true for endurance training, strength training. We often see blunted gains with older individuals. That's why I want you guys to start training now, because it's harder to get strong when you're older and weak. Now, what are our current exercise recommendations? We want the current recommendations are 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity 5 days a week, or you can cut that in half if you go to higher intensity exercise, just doing that for 25 minutes, 3 days a week, 2 to 3 days a week. Now, strength exercise, we also want to get, and it's at least 2 days per week, where you get most, if not all, of the major muscle groups of your body. These levels of physical activity are associated with great health benefits. Now, let me show you again this diagram that shows relationship between exercise and health and mortality. This is the risk of death of people that do no exercise. Here's the risk of death of people that meet roughly those guidelines, a 30% reduction in mortality. If you cannot meet those guidelines, let's say you don't have that much time and you can only get up and do half of it, you still see a huge benefit to exercise. So for your friends and family that are saying, I don't have time to go do 30 minutes of exercise every day, just do a little bit. As you'll read in the activity guidelines, even doing a little bit of exercise in small bouts, like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, has measurable impact on your health. So, moral of the story is to exercise, get up and move, avoid being sedentary. Chairs should probably come with warning labels. They increase your risk of death if you're sitting for a long time. The other thing I want you to pay attention as you go through your exercise science studies, look at this. So this is about a 40% reduction in mortality. I want you to find medications that you can take that will reduce your risk of mortality by 40%. There aren't very many, if any. Exercise has such a potent stimulus on your health. It's so good for you in so many ways, for your mental health, for your physical health, heart health, risk of cancer, risk of Alzheimer's disease. All these things are reduced by exercise. So, when you're prescribing exercise, remember you need to overload the system, do more than you're used to, overreach just a little bit more than you're used to usually. You can do that by changing the frequency, the intensity, the time of the exercise, or the type of the exercise. And since you're BYU students, I challenge you to apply this FITT principle to anything that you do in life, not just exercise. If you want to get better at something, think the FITT principle. If you want to get better at piano, FITT principle. If you want to get more spiritual, FITT principle. This is how you elicit adaptation, overloading the system, tipping homeostasis.